What if you could use your perfectionism to become a better parent more easily? My name's Jodie Thornton, and a lot of people, when we talk about wanting to be better parents, whether we say perfect parent or whether we say better parents, a lot of people will say to you that no one can be a perfect parent and you should lower your standards. And I just think, what a load of crap. And I know this is a controversial thing to say, but I really want to talk about what we can do with our perfectionism, and rather than just assuming that it's a bad thing and lowering our standards. Like, I can't even say lower our parenting standards without feeling uncomfortable. I'm not saying we should exhaust ourselves or we should be self-blaming or critical or guilty, but what I am saying is that I have not met a parent who's not capable of being the parent that they want to be. I honestly have not. Now, sometimes parents will want to be able to use particular strategies that don't work for their situation. Yes, sometimes those kinds of things are impossible. But when we talk about what's really important to them, I've not met a single parent who is not capable of becoming the parent they want to be. So let's talk about what would it mean to use our perfectionism to our advantage rather than assume that it's unrealistic and unachievable. So if we think about what do we mean when we say perfectionism, and a lot of how we experience perfectionism and a lot of how perfectionism is labeled is if you do everything right, then you will be safe. Right? And now some people say, I just have to do everything right, or I'm a type A, or, there's all these kinds of ways. But when we really unpack, why have any of us become perfectionists? It's usually a safety mechanism. So I will be safe, whether it's literally, whether it is from an embarrassment perspective or feeling safe as in you belong in the group. There's all sorts of ways that we might use perfectionism as a safety mechanism. And so if we unpack what that means, do everything right? What does right mean? Right? And usually when we're talking about perfectionism, it's I do everything in a way that no one can criticize me for. Now, if we use that definition, of course it's impossible, right? Not only would you do every single thing in a way that no one could criticize you, that is very difficult and I would say impossible to do in the first place. But then secondly, there's so many different opinions on parenting, and there's so many different ways that people believe, whether you parent differently to a child's personality or you don't, or you have, there's just no way that you could be beyond criticism in a parenting space. So if we agree that that's not realistic, right? I totally am on the same page with that. But when I ask my perfectionist clients, and I am a perfectionist as well, and I am not giving up that label, and we can talk a little bit more about that in a second, but when I talk to my perfectionist clients and when I analyze for myself, what does being a perfect parent mean? These are the kinds of things that my clients say. Number one, I want to create a relationship with my child where they can be their full selves and be unapologetic and be seen and loved and understood. That's achievable, right? It is 100% achievable. If we look at another option, I want to raise my child so that they know what is a healthy relationship, so they don't get stuck in an unhealthy relationship. That's achievable. Now, if we think about this, it is possible that depending on your circumstances, you may not get there before your child's first significant relationship, right? I'm not saying that these things are achievable overnight, but it is achievable for you as a parent to help your child understand what is healthy to expect in a relationship, so that they can walk away from people who are not treating them in a way that's good for them. Now, another one is, I want to teach my child not to be a people pleaser. That is achievable. And so I really want to encourage you to, instead of looking at what would be a day-to-day perfect parent, so they would always say the right thing, or they would follow the gentle parenting approach perfectly, it's what is a perfect parent to you? And I want you to really think about what is it that it would be for you, right? And if we think about those bigger picture goals, the day-to-day mistakes are actually less important. And I would say, for me, part of being a perfect parent is recognizing that people make mistakes. right? So if I'm raising a child who understands that they make mistakes and other people will make mistakes, it's not the mistakes that are the problem, it's how we then handle the mistakes, right? Then, of course, I'm allowed to make mistakes. Like, I have to be, right? So, if we think about it from this perspective as like, what is a perfect parent to you? That will make that sentence, like, if I do it right, I'll be safe, right? We need to really unpack, what does right mean, right? What does right mean for you? And for different people, it's different things, but I want you to really get clear. Use your perfectionism to don't have like low standards for yourself. And I'm not saying we should be mean. Again, I'm not saying we should be mean to ourselves. I'm not saying we should be guilty. What I'm saying is, you are allowed to decide what kind of parent you want to be. You're allowed. And I guarantee you you're capable of it. I guarantee you. As I say, I cannot guarantee you a time frame, but I can guarantee you are capable of learning the skills, of teaching your child, of creating the circumstances. I guarantee you that you are capable of it. And so if you're allowed to decide what kind of parent you want to be and you're capable of it, why lower your standards? Like, why, right? How we get there is a different thing, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I want you to allow your perfectionism to roam free and decide what is the kind of parent you want to be, right? That's what I want you to do as number one. So number two is, our perfectionism allows us the enormous skill of being able to very, very accurately criticize something, right? And usually we're criticizing ourselves for making mistakes or doing something incorrect or allowing ourselves to be criticized or, all of these things, right? What I want you to do is actually apply that skill, that analytical skill, apply that to whether the approach you are taking right now is going to get you from where you are now to where you want to be. And this is a place where your perfectionism can come in very handy. It comes in handy when someone says to you, you just need to stay calm. And you can see that your child is not actually learning how to handle their emotions just from watching you stay calm. You can see it. You can also see that just staying calm while your child has extreme emotions all of the time is so triggering for you that you cannot do it consistently. Then it's not the perfect approach for you, right? It's not a good fit. This is where I want you to allow your perfectionism to say, if I look at what I'm doing and where I want to be, I don't think we're getting there, right? That's where you want to look for, is this approach working for me? And if it isn't, what specifically is missing? Is the approach unachievable for me in my circumstances? Does the approach assume that I have certain levels of privilege that I don't have, right? Does the approach, a great example actually, there's so many white parenting experts who talk about how gunplay is normal and should be allowed. And parents, black parents will say, from the US, will say, I cannot do that for my child. If I do that, my child will be unsafe, right? Clearly this approach is not working for those parents. And I have to say, I don't have full knowledge, so I'm not sure if that's a universal opinion of black parents in the US. But there are a number of black parents who have brought that up consistently over the years, that this is a very white-centric approach, right? That's not going to work for me. You might have an approach that assumes that you are able to stay regulated more consistently than you are. Like, if that's not where you're at, then we need to use a different approach. And I want you to allow those high standards and that critical analytic skill to look at, does this actually work for me? Or is this assuming I can do things I can't? Another good example is financial privilege. A lot of gentle parenting approaches to food will talk about allowing waste. Well, if you are really struggling to make ends meet, allowing food waste is not realistic, right? It's just not realistic. Does that mean you can't raise your child with a healthy relationship to food? No, right? So instead of there's this idea of like, well, not everything's achievable for everybody, so just lower your standard. We want to figure out how there's always going to be a way to get you to where your goals are. Maybe your circumstances will mean that it will take you longer than somebody else who has more privilege. Maybe your circumstances mean that you might need to try a few different approaches before you find the one that fits. But there's no reason for us to lower our standards. And I want to be really clear that, for example, if you are in a situation where financially you need to focus on your income or your career or whatever the issue is, and you can't focus on parenting right now, that doesn't mean that you're being an imperfect parent. Focusing on something that is incredibly important to your child to have as the financial situation that you want for them. But secondly, focusing on what's causing you the most stress and then getting to parenting when you have more space, that is perfect parenting, right? If we overload you with so many things to focus on that you cannot do anything consistently, you're going to make less progress. And so sometimes we have to put parenting on the back burner, and that is perfect parenting. I will die on this hill that it is perfect parenting, but sometimes you need to focus on other priorities and come back to parenting when there's space. So again, we want to allow that perfectionism to get you to understand, is this approach actually achievable? Is it realistic? Is it working for me? Now, the last thing I want to say is that when we look at a lot of parenting advice, there is this idea that you need to do X, Y, and Z. So there's like an approach to gentle parenting, or there's an approach to getting a particular parenting outcome. And when I look at this kind of advice, it's almost like you have either there's a single script that you need to remember and recite, or there's a collection of scripts and you just try them out and see what one you have. And so one of the ones that I saw this morning was like, these are some playful ways to handle tricky situations with your kids, and things like playfully calling attention to the fact that they're not listening. Now, if they're not listening because they're actually really upset at you, being playful can totally backfire. It can totally be showing your child that you are not attuned to what's going on for them right now. Right? And so if we are just like going through a Rolodex of scripts, of possible scripts that might work, right, that is the kind of perfect parenting that people say you can't expect yourself to do it all the time, because you can't expect yourself to A, know every single script you're supposed to remember, and B, remember how to say it, C, be regulated enough to do it consistently. Those things are actually unrealistic. However, if we look at, instead of remembering and reciting scripts of the correct approach, if we look at what are the skills you need to be able to get from where you and your children are right now to where you want to be. And once you have those skills, so the ability to help your child identify what are their feelings telling them, what is the root cause of the feelings that they're having right now, right? That is a skill that you can learn. It's not a script, right? It's a skill that you can learn to A, you can help your child do it, and then B, they will come a time where they will be able to do that independently. Another one is, do you have the skills to be able to regulate your child in the moment? Not to be able to stay regulated while your child is dysregulated, which can be valuable, but what is more valuable is, do you have the actual skills to be able to give your child assistance in getting regulated when they're dysregulated? Another one, do you have the skills to help your child articulate their feelings, articulate what it is that they need? Do you have the skills to be able to teach your child how to respect the boundaries of another person? These are all skills, not scripts, right? And so if we allow our perfectionism to shift, instead of, have I got the script right, to a critical analysis of what skills am I missing as a parent? Which skills do I actually need right now? So like, you don't have to learn every single skill all the time, but it's like, which skills are the ones that will give me the best improvement in our circumstances right now, right? Allow your perfectionism to have those high standards, to critically analyze what you need and whether you have access to it. So is this a case of you know how to do it but you haven't gotten in the habit of doing it? Is this a case of all the gentle parenting information you've been consuming doesn't actually tell you how to help a child regulate? They just tell you you should stay calm, and then your child will eventually get calm. That's not assistance, right? Well, I guess you could say it's passive assistance. There's not a lot of gentle parenting advice that actually talks about what active assistance is to help someone to regulate, right? So allow your perfectionism to do that. So if we go through those 3 things again, is allowing your perfectionism to have high standards to decide what is a perfect parent to you, right? And as I say, even the parents who are kicking themselves for not being able to do things correctly or kicking themselves because they've made mistakes, when I ask them, what is a perfect parent to you? What they say is not, they never lose their cool. What they say is that I lose my cool less often. Right? What they say is, I want my child to not be impacted by my emotions. These are things that you are allowed to require of yourself, and you are capable of learning to do. Not necessarily overnight, but you can do it. Number 2 was looking at allowing your perfectionism to have high standards that the approach you're using actually works for you and your child. Allow your perfectionism to assess whether this is working, and if it's not working for you, what do you need instead? Allow your perfectionism to give you those high standards about not following approaches that aren't working. And the last one was allowing your perfectionism to see, does your approach work in your circumstances? Is it realistic and achievable for you? And are you looking at a script to remember and recite versus looking at skills? Use those critical analysis skills to go, what skills am I missing and where can I get those? Now, I am running a webinar called Gentle Parenting in Reality, and we're going to talk about, I'm going to go in depth into what skills you need and what signifies or what would tell you that actually it's this skill versus that skill to focus on next. I'm also going to be talking about, like, if gentle parenting isn't working for you in practice, so either your partner's not on the same page, you don't have the luxury of spending hours and hours, your child isn't gentle childing, or your triggers are getting in the way of you following through on what you intend, we're going to be talking about how can we shift the perspective, shift the lens we are looking at parenting from, and really look at what do I need to be doing to make sure that I can realistically implement gentle parenting. If you're interested in that one, the link to register is jodithornton.com/reality. So that one will really take you through each of these pieces in much greater detail, and hopefully it will be really helpful. And as I say, like, you're allowed to want what you want, and I promise you're capable of it. It may take longer, but it doesn't need to be hard. Like, if we look at having these high standards, but using those critical analysis skills to look at what is and isn't working, then we start to make progress rather than just assessing, like, did I do the thing perfectly? It's like, am I getting the results? Am I moving towards the results? And if I'm not, what do I need? If we take that approach, all of a sudden, we're making more progress and parenting gets easier. And I think that's the thing, is like, being a perfect parent doesn't need to be hard. It doesn't need to be frustrating. It doesn't need to be, you don't need to have parent guilt. Like, all of these things are not necessary for you to become the parent you need to be. We can take this, when you have an approach that works for you and your child in your circumstances, you will see consistent progress and you will get there. I promise you that. So I hope this has been really helpful. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out.